Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again a friend, Jeff Deist. Jeff is the president of the Mises Institute. That's an educational organization dedicated to promoting Austrian economics, freedom, and peace. Jeff previously was the chief of staff to Congressman Ron Paul when he was running for president, and his background as a tax attorney, and he has represented high net worth people in the past, partnerships and the like. And he is a real lover of freedom and limited government, and of course that's a good reason why he worked for Ron Paul. Jeff, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, Jay.
Always good to hear your voice and to hear what you have to say from the Mises Institute. It's Mises.org, Mises.org, where people can go. There's lots of articles that are written there. You have a podcast. You have, I think, various webcast, various things that you do there, in which you interview people who really are in favor of limited government, freedom for the individual, which is, of course, something that people seem not to hold in high esteem these days. They would just as soon we'll all just, goose step together down the pike, I guess. It seems that way, and we're all supposed to think alike and be alike, and we're supposed to have the same color of skin, apparently, and we're supposed to, all wear masks and just behave in a monolithic manner, it seems. So I want to focus a lot on your, you put out, I think it's almost monthly or every couple of months, I guess. It's the Austrian. This is the May-June edition that focused on a corona crisis that we're facing now. And I just wanted to pick up from the Austrian magazine, and you wrote, and I would quote here, Jeff, Elon Musk, longtime recipient of federal green energy subsidies, has seen the light. Like millions of other Americans, including the editorial staff of Mises.org, way back in March, he now understands that COVID-19 crisis largely as a state-created insanity, end of quote. I'm sure a lot of people, I don't know how many people listening to this show would find that as an outlandish statement. I don't, but certainly the mainstream media would find that statement offensive. But just maybe you can tell our listeners, for those that might not be aware, what Mr. Musk went through with the state of California and why what caused him to see the light.
Well, he's an interesting guy and has a lot of his own personal wealth and, of course, his public company shareholder wealth tied up, among other things, in his production facility in Fremont, California, a little south of Oakland. And when that facility was shut down, in effect, by order of the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, along with all kinds of other businesses, that put a huge hurting on his bottom line, needless to say, and also on some promises he had made to customers and investors about how many, especially of the Tesla 3 model, I can't recall what it's called, it's the smaller, more affordable Tesla. And, he has every right to be angry about that. I have to poke a little fun at him because he has gotten a lot of so-called green energy subsidies via the federal government, which has made buying a Tesla something less than a pure market economic transaction because you get a tax credit that makes it more competitive than buying some sort of other luxury upscale combustion engine car. But he's clearly brilliant, what he's doing with SpaceX and all that. So I think what it comes down to is we have to understand that regardless of the virus and its transmittability and its potential lethality, the response to it, the crisis, the economic crisis, is something that was very much baked into the cake before the virus came along, and also something that's very much been caused by the government's reaction to this virus. So we have to sort of distinguish in our minds between the fact that there's an unpleasant health hazard out there and the fact that there is a far worse and more damaging, in my opinion, government response. So they're two very different things. And I don't want government officials, whether that's Trump or people at the Treasury or people in Congress, or certainly not people at the central bank, to get away with blaming this crash that we're experiencing in slow motion on COVID, because a lot of the problems in excessive debt, huge amounts of deficit spending were already baked in before COVID ever came along.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's a convenient excuse, I suppose, and people that don't really understand, the nature of our economic system and how Keynesian economics has been distorting everything through the use of, let's say, dilution of money, the debasement of the currency, which is certainly, and the piling of debt, which of course this is, the currency is manufactured from debt, so we have debt that is growing much more rapidly than income over many decades now. Ever since we went off the international gold standard, you can see it on charts, and you can see the redistribution of income from average people, people that made a decent salary, like those I grew up with in Ohio and the Midwest in the 1960s and even 1970s, but after that. So, Jeff, I mean, how we're always told, the main media has us all believing, they make you feel guilty if you don't put a mask on when you go outside, when you're walking, even if you're not around people. They just use, oh, my goodness, that person's wearing a mask, good man. That one's not, heretic. And it's just this sort of sense of a police state mentality that I can never remember having gone through in the past, to this extent at least.
Well, they love politicizing everything. We've got global warming believers versus denialists. We have Trumpers versus anti-Trumpers. We have vaccine people versus anti-vaxxers. It just goes on and on and on. And so now they've created a new thing, mask wearers versus mask deniers. So there's no end to the politics of all this. I would only submit that if masks really work, then why don't we reopen everything with the one caveat that we all wear them? In other words, if we're going to have the damn masks, then open Yankee Stadium and let's have school in the fall, and let's get back to restaurants, and let's all go back to work and wear the mask. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying wear the mask, and we remain shut down, and we don't open schools in the fall, and we don't have football in the fall, and all these things. So, there's a lot going on here, but because of the gross politicization of our country prior to this epidemic coming along, we're falling very neatly into those same politicized categories now, and it was inescapable, I think. And so now we're in this very nasty situation where even within families there's discord over how severe the virus is. I'm certainly on the side that says or argues the virus is wildly overhyped. It is largely an existential danger to older people or to people with certain immune compromised situations, and that for everyone else under about age 50, there are lots of sensible ways to simply have life as normal. We could be washing our hands a little more, that sort of thing. So, there are plenty of people who disagree with that, but the question is, who bears the burden of proof? And I would argue that people who want to remake society and shut down the economy and risk a global deep recession or depression bear the overwhelming burden of proof. And if you believe the famous Stanford epidemiologist who's been making headlines lately, for people under 70, this virus is no more lethal than other strains of flu, which we experience year in, year out, and somehow manage to get by, and kill some people, but we live with it in society. So it's a tough time when everyone's at each other's throats to make rational arguments and rational decisions, because a lot of this comes down to get Trump. And I think a lot of folks on the left, however well-meaning they may be with respect to the virus and not wanting people to be harmed, see an advantage to keeping America in turmoil via lockdowns, not going back to school, not having fall sports, and that turmoil will make people not vote for Trump because, it's astonishing he's even president at this point. Because why? The economy's in the tank. We have riots in the streets, statues being pulled down. Let's face it. If you voted for Donald Trump with the thought that he would be a bodyguard of sorts against the worst excesses of the left, well, he's not doing it.
Yeah, he's certainly not. Maybe some tough rhetoric at times, but he doesn't, for whatever reasons. I want to ask you, Jeff, I think one of the ideas in your magazine was the benefits of a free society during a pandemic. Let's say we hadn't locked down. Let's say that we had followed the Swedish model And, I have an article in front of me that says, looks like Sweden was right after all. But for that argument, there's as many people that will stand up and say absolutely no, because, the idea that life is of paramount importance, but people don't seem to really recognize the danger and the damages that are caused that are less visibly or less directly related to, dying from the virus. So let's say that we had followed the Swedish model. How do you think we would be? I mean, we were in trouble before. That's your point, that our economy was in big trouble anyway, right? So I don't know how much better off we might have been. I mean, I think we're destined for some kind of a major decline anyway in the economy. I believe that before COVID came along. But let's say we hadn't shut down everything the way we did. Would we be better off?
I think we would be. I think we would find that, like other viruses, people are exposed to it. They might get slightly ill for a day or two, or not at all. And then life moves on, and we begin developing antibodies. I mean, that's what happens with bacterial infections and viral infections for the most part, is that your body's exposed to it and you live with it, you coexist with it, and your immune system functions at least to the extent that you don't get too sick. What we really ought to be worrying about is hospitalizations and deaths. That's the key, not cases, not mere infections. An infection is nothing more than a term for someone who's been exposed to it. If you swabbed the inside of my throat right now, you'd find staph. And if I fall down the stairs and twist my ankle and go to the ER, am I in the ER because I have a staph infection? No, I'm in the ER because I twisted and broke my ankle. So I think Sweden did it right. I think there's no perfect in a situation like this. Humans have been dealing with viruses for millennia, and of course they've gone to work and remained open through all kinds of things like huge world wars, the Great Plagues. So this is a situation where we're over-governed, and we just lack common sense to deal with things.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I know, looking at Sweden and looking at my wife's home country of Portugal, but roughly the same population, Sweden has had 3 or 4 times more deaths per million people than Portugal. But Portugal locked down. I mean, to the point where if you were out on the street, cops would stop you and say, or if there were 2 people in a car, sometimes they would get upset and they would make you go home or whatever. So, but the numbers are lower. So maybe they've saved some deaths in Portugal as a result of it. But we don't know what the cost in Portugal is to the economy. That's harder to measure, isn't it?
Well, the cost to the economy is going to cause deaths, too, in terms of depression, weight gain, suicide, medical treatment, which has gone undone because no one wants to go near a hospital, tumors not found, surgeries not performed, alcoholism, depression, drug abuse. So there are countless unseen or less visible ways by which locking people down causes death and health concerns as well. So it's not quite as black and white as that. I'm not sure that I believe all of the Swedish COVID death numbers. In other words, there's some evidence that some of the deaths being attributed to COVID are actually comorbidities, things that someone died with the virus present rather than of the virus. Yeah. So that's a little beyond my pay grade. I'm just saying I'm a little skeptical with regard to the deaths per million. But the bottom line here is that we live in the United States. As Judge Napolitano talked about last night, the goal of the United States government is not to provide perfect safety to anyone. Due process applies even when things are ugly, like during a war or a terrorist attack or a pandemic. And so before government can simply force us to remain home, it needs to have some sort of showing of particular harm by a particular individual and have some sort of process, a hearing, or if not an outright trial. And of course, that's impossible to do for 320 million people. And I think the answer to that is that there's a reason why it's impossible, that this is outside the government's sphere of influence or authority under the Constitution. And so what we have seen a little of, which gives me a glimmer of hope, is that we've seen some federalism. We've not only had different countries going at the virus very differently in terms of their approach, but we've also had states within the U.S. Going at things very differently. Like if you compare New York State to South Dakota, where Governor Kristi Noem has basically kept things about as normal as they could be. So, we're going to have some, when this is all said and done, we're going to be able to sort of look back and see a scoreboard of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. And you pointed out hospitalizations and deaths, which are statistics that we don't hear very much. The only time we hear about it in the mainstream media is when the hospitalizations are approaching capacity. But we don't hear about deaths per, relative to the number of cases. They seem to be declining dramatically since the first. Jeff, with just a couple of minutes left here, I want to ask you one of the short articles that you wrote in the magazine, how to think about the Fed now in this environment. What are you expecting from the Fed? What are you expecting, and how should people sort of plan their lives around that? Because the Fed is so powerful. It can, it's like, when I own shares of stock, and all of a sudden the company decides to issue twice as many shares. Now all of a sudden my shares are worth half as much as they were before. That's what the government is. That's what the Fed is doing to us all the time, to people that don't have a way of making money fast enough to keep up with the Fed. Anyway, what are your thoughts about the Fed now as we go forward with this problem?
Well, we've seen what Jerome Powell is. When the chips are down, he's another Bernanke, another maestro, Alan Greenspan, and he'll do whatever it takes to keep equity markets propped up via more liquidity. That's the buzzword of today. But in this case, in this go-around, not just equity markets, bond markets, all kinds of markets, municipal bond markets, credit markets. So the difference between this go-round and 2008, other than degree, which is an important difference, magnitude, is that they're buying the Fed is buying different kinds of assets, or at least securitizing, lending against different kinds of assets. So all of the money is not just going to bank reserves of commercial banks in exchange for treasury debt or mortgage-backed securities. A lot of this money is going out into the world. And so I think that's a fundamental difference. But this guy, Jerome Powell, will absolutely take the balance sheet to $10 trillion. I don't think there's any question about that if he must, because we saw last fall, before there was any real crisis, when during the repo period, exactly. September, October, when things were very, very nervous, and even after 10 years, more than 10 years of just unprecedented QE, we still had commercial banks without enough liquidity to deal with each other overnight. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So
no, it's obviously the system is broken. We're going to have to leave it go at that, Jeff, because we're just out of time. But I mean, the system is broken, and we know why. Austrian economists can understand this, and they've been predicting it, and the Mises Institute has been predicting it for years. Folks, do yourselves a favor, go to Mises.org, catch up with Jeff and a lot of intellectuals, people that are really providing practical information as well there at Mises.org. Take advantage of this resource. It's very, very important. It will be helpful to you. We'll have to leave it go at that, Jeff. Thank you so much for being with us again.